Thank you so much, Agnes. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your team and to the audience here. Appreciate so much being allowed to not just practice and enjoy these lands, but also to be in coexistence with them. So, as we like to say at Saguaro National Park, we really are focusing on honoring the land and honoring the people. So, again, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with y'all. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen real quick, and I'm going to go through some slides here just to kind of get the conversation going. Let me know if you're able to see this screen. And I
Yes,
always,
it's on the screen.
excellent. And I always forget if it actually starts sharing the way it's supposed to if I'm in the slide sections. But anyway, the purpose of today's conversation is really to kind of really start this this effort to try to make Saguaro National Park much more accessible to folks with any kind of disability or any kind of limitation, or even folks that are aging in place that sometimes have mobility issues, hearing issues, vision issues, anything that comes with age. As we get more modern with our medical breakthroughs, people are living longer, more fulfilling lives, and part of that entails spending some of that time, maybe after retirement, in public lands, specifically Saguaro National Park. So, as we were working with the University of Arizona and the College of Public Health, we had one set of grad students that I was working with, and in particular, this particular group of young people decided that they were going to focus on a gap analysis at Saguaro National Park. This gap analysis was designed to see what were some of the issues or barriers that they identified that kept folks with limited mobility or or vision issues, but predominantly mobility issues from interacting with the park. Saguaro National Park, as some of you may or may not know, is broken up into two districts. I'll illustrate that here in the map in a second. I'm going to move on to the next screen here. As I mentioned before, we want to honor the land and honor the people. But to the average hiker, on a trail in Saguaro National Park, there's not a lot of thought given to folks that may not be ambulatory or have any kind of barriers to hiking through trails that maybe aren't just changing in elevation, but are also maybe a little bit rocky. Maybe the surface is uneven. Maybe you're looking at some steps that you have to climb or climb over rocks or any kind of natural barrier in the walkway. Our trail crews at Saguaro National Park and at all national parks endeavor, continuously to try to make the trails as easy to navigate as possible. But in natural spaces, especially in wilderness areas, we're not really looking at ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, predominantly because the Wilderness Act is in a way superseding that. It would be virtually impossible to make all of these spaces accessible in its entirety. But there's definitely an interest in making it as accessible as possible. I spoke with a young man at an event that was focused on people with disabilities, the City of Tucson's Disability Pride Day, and the young man was in a wheelchair, and he said, my girlfriend and I love to pop in, onto trails as much as we can. We'll load up the SUV, and we'll head to the park, or we'll head to a public land space, and we will hike that trail as far as we can. Never did he mention, oh, I'm limited because of my disability. He just said we go as far as we possibly can. Sometimes those trails just get more and more challenging as you go, and this is for someone who obviously is able to see and hear, but more than likely is facing issues around mobility. So as he was talking about that, it occurred to me that there is a way for us at Saguaro National Park to allow him to go even further down that trail. And a lot of it has to do with us understanding what those barriers are, understanding how we can get around those barriers, and also what kind of information can we as a national park provide to the public, whether it's local or folks visiting from out of state or even out of the country, to better understand what the space is like, and what kind of barriers exist for them to plan their visit accordingly. So that's predominantly what the graduate student group discovered, that there was a lack of information available. Most national parks have moved to 508 compliance on their websites, which means that they're accessible to people with different types of visual disabilities. But providing enough information about what trails are potentially accessible to people in mobility devices, that's incredibly important to provide to the public, so that folks can make their own informed decisions. So that's something that we as a national park have begun to address by looking at our maps, looking at our trails. One of the things that national parks are doing very successfully is beginning to use a device called a heat tap data collector. Heat tap is essentially, if you think of the early days of Google Maps, we had vehicles driving around all over our communities with cameras on their roofs and on their mirrors and whatnot, and they were driving around mapping all of the main streets and residential streets in order to provide us with visual interpretation of what these streets look like. So a heat tap device is similar to that Google car that you saw with all those cameras, in that it's collecting multiple points of data as you use the device, which looks a lot like one of those unicycles, And so the device is pushed along by a staff person or a volunteer along a trail, and it will collect data such as the type of ground cover that we have. Is it rocky? Is it sandy? Is it is there a lot of elevation changes? What kind of barriers are there? So it's collecting all of these points of data, more than 16 points of data as you're rolling that thing. So if you collect data for about a mile, you would give the average person to be able to the opportunity to be able to use that data. Once we convert that data to usable, user friendly information, we would then provide that information to the local public in some form or another that, like I said, is usable. So that heat tap data is something that's been collected for the last few years at Saguaro National Park along some of our trails. We're in the process now of converting that data so that that data is available on our website. That'll be part of this project that we're working on. So a little bit of background. I was recruited in 2015 by the National Park Service, specifically the former superintendent of Saguaro National Park, Darla Seidels. And what she said, which was a few months before the beginning of the 2016 National Park Centennial, what she said was, look, Cam, there's a lot of folks coming to our park, and we predict that there's going to be a lot more as the National Park Service is advertising, really, which isn't an allowable thing to do for national parks. Traditionally, national parks are not something that's advertised, because national parks are a space that it falls under the Department of Interior, which is more about conservation. In contrast, the Department of Agriculture, which houses the U.S. Forest Service, is about land use. So they have the ability to advertise and promote their national or U.S. Forests, which is why you see stuff like Smokey Bear, Woodsy Owl, all of the promotional things that were provided by the Ad Council to get people to go into U.S. forests, because the idea was to get people to use that land, whereas national parks are more about conservation. Um, so when I asked her, who are we conserving these lands for? She said, well, I think you can help me, address that issue of us not being able to talk about this in the way the U.S. forests do. So my job was predominantly to create inroads with the local community, as well as other organizations, state and national, to talk about why it's important to conserve these lands. But conservation requires knowledge. It requires awareness. It requires a collaboration with local entities and the local public because we want to protect this beautiful place that is the Sonoran Desert. So that's what she explained to me. So that was 9 years ago. In fact, as of Friday, which is tomorrow, as of the recording of this webinar, I will be celebrating my 9 year anniversary with the National Park Service. So the goal was to create inroads, was to create partnerships, was to create the opportunity to engage with untold or undertold stories, which is one of the problems that we as a Park Service recognize, that we're not talking about all the stories that have to be that are connected with this land. And so as part of my job, I was very delighted to be told that we would be focusing a lot on connecting with the indigenous communities. There is a lot of traditional ecological knowledge uh, held with elders, held with young people. It's part of the tradition is to carry those stories and carry that knowledge forward generation after generation. So thinking about what Tucson has experienced working with both the Tohono and the Pasquayaki, but also looking at Gila River Indian communities and Salt River Indian communities, and looking in and around the valley that is part of the southeast Arizona, but also the central valley of Arizona. We have been partnering quite a bit with different communities in the area. And so part of sharing that knowledge is having the ability to say, hey, this is this special land. We also want to share in understanding and learning from the tribal communities in the park itself. And to be able to do that, we need to make the park accessible to all, which is why we applied for the National Parks Foundation grant for the Parks for All project. We're calling it Parks for All because what we want to do is we want to be meaningful in our efforts to engage as many communities as possible. A lot of times, you develop plans and you develop strategies, and unfortunately, some of those strategies and plans end up on a shelf somewhere. What we want to do here is not fully commit to saying we're going to make this park the most accessible park in the country. What we're saying is we want to use these funds because these funds were directed to be spent on partnerships. They weren't directed to be spent on capital improvement projects such as trails or bathrooms or anything like that. They also weren't designed to purchase equipment, which we don't have the equipment that would make this park fully accessible. But the idea was to develop this proposal that I submitted to National Parks Foundation for to the tune of around $47,000 to essentially put together not one, not two, but 10 events that would focus on folks with any kind of special needs around mobility, vision, providing opportunities for American Sign Language interpreters, but be able to provide information, to provide experiences so that we could do one of two things. Well, actually, two of two things, and that is increase the enjoyment of the visitor experience, but also help to increase the focus on conserving these special places, not just for our current generation, but for future generations. And so, thinking about that, what we're doing is we're going to be planning 10 special events in and around the Tucson area, predominantly at the Rincon Mountain District on the east side and the Tucson Mountain District on the west side. As I mentioned before, we have two districts for Saguaro National Park, and here's an image of that. The East District, which is the division here, is around Tanque Verde. Anything north of that is part of the U.S. Forest Lands, and so that would be Mount Lemmon, that would be Sabino Canyon. All of that would be part of the U.S. Forest. South of that, we're looking at the boundaries of Saguaro National Park East. Our headquarters is at Saguaro National Park East, and that's where my office is. But looking here as we move west, we have Central Tucson. We have the University of Arizona there, and then just past that, over the Tucson Mountains and over Gates Pass, As you pass Old Tucson Studios and you pass the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, you will come into Tucson Mountain Park, which is a county park, and then moving just northwest of that to Saguaro National Park. Saguaro National Park West, or Tucson Mountain District, is a much smaller district, and in fact was added during the Kennedy administration, and then during the Clinton administration, we became a full-fledged national park. Prior to that, we were Saguaro National Monument, which is what some of the older folks will call Saguaro National Park, the monument, as it was prior to 1993. So both districts have plenty of trails. The West District is in direct partnership with the Tohono Nation. It is in this unit where in the summer we hold the Saguaro fruit harvest, and during the winter times we're engaged in a lot of storytelling events. We just had one recently where we had over 150 attendees, many of them part of the Tohono Nation. But these special events are about telling some of these stories. And in the wintertime is when the nation or members of the community are able to tell stories because that's when some of the animals are asleep, and that's when members of the nation are able to talk about that. Outside of the winter solstice, so we don't do a lot of storytelling around that because it's not part of the traditional way of doing things. So the winter time is a time for storytelling, and the summertime is a time for fruit harvest. So it is an opportunity for us to learn from the community members, but it's also an opportunity for us to engage community members, not just as visitors in the national park, but also as members of our Saguaro National Park team, whether they are working with us as interns through well, give me a second, our next generation internship program, which many of our members have come in through that way. This year, we were able to secure a member from the Pascoyaqui tribe to be part of that program as well. And we're learning a lot from those young people as well. There's a lot of traditional knowledge that's being shared with us. But we also have a permanent position there at the park, and Rashawn Ramon is our tribal specialist. He is an engagement specialist, and has been growing our collaborations with the tribe, which is great. So part of the conversations I've been having with Rashawn is what kind of issues are present with the Tohono Nation, and can we better understand what those issues are with other tribal community members, whether you're Pascoyaqui or you're Dene, Navajo, or you're a member of other tribal communities, in and around the state, but also outside of the state. How do we better improve the experience while maintaining the conservation of Saguaro National Park in mind? How do we improve those experiences for those folks? Because those are two of our primary objectives as a national park. And so what we're intending to do is we're intending to better understand what those needs are, what those barriers are, and how do we alleviate those barriers, and how do we address those needs. And so that's something that this grant will provide us through a lot of conversation. We're hosting our first events here in March. March 8th is our target date for our first event. And this event happens to fall also on International Women's Day, which is a way for us to celebrate those that hold up half the sky, right? And so we want to make sure that we're providing those opportunities and focusing not just on those communities, but to anyone who is looking to attend the national park and experience what the park has to offer, from our natural and cultural resources to our citizen science to our opportunities to develop a career here at Saguaro National Park and within the National Park Service. So the goal would be to host events where we invite the general public. The difference here is that rather than put accessibility as a side or a complementary component of our event planning, because everybody wants to make these events as accessible as possible. Our purpose here is to put all of that accessibility at the forefront. So we're forward thinking with how we plan these events. In other words, we're going to plan an everyday typical special event that we do at the park, whether it's hiking, whether it's biking, whether it's exploring the park, or whether it's bird watching or other kinds of nature activities. So we're going to plan those events, but we're going to plan them with those folks in mind. And every event will have a focus on all the disabilities we can address. And mind you, most people think of a disability as something that's visual, something that maybe someone's in a wheelchair, or maybe somebody has a white cane, or maybe somebody is deaf mute or deaf and needs an ASL interpreter. There's also other disabilities, and it gets definitely gets complicated as we look to address all the disabilities that we can. When you're talking about neurodivergent folks, I for one have age attention deficit disorder, right? So I don't know if I would call it a disorder, but I think it's more of a superpower myself. But I'm also physically able. I have shortened arms, and my arms really become a factor for me when I'm planning an event. I'm not a huge fan of holding binoculars for very long, but I love bird watching. So figuring out ways for us to be able to either identify equipment that can help folks that maybe need a little bit of assistance, or maybe identifying people that are willing to volunteer and help out with special events. One event that is in mind, for example, in my mind, is bird watching, right? So as we're planning our calendar for fiscal year 2025 and the beginning of fiscal year 2026, the grant is for 18 months. And so we're looking at ending our work in April of 2026 with this grant. And the idea is, one example I'll give you is we're calling it the early birder event. We're not really figured out the title of that yet, but the intention is to have a bird watching event in the summer. As we all know, Tucson and the Sonoran Desert get pretty warm in the summer. So how do we continue that work throughout the summer months? Well, let's just be honest. Through the 9 months of 100+ degree weather, and so the idea is to try to focus on early morning events or late in the evening events. So one example would be a bird watching event, but we would call it the early birder watcher event, or the early birdability has been another name that we've tossed around. The idea would be to have a bird watching event early in the morning when birds are the most active in the summer. Another event that we're looking at in the warmer months is a dark sky event. So we would partner with some of the astronomy organizations, potentially Kit Peak, and potentially the Tucson amateur astronomers, to set up telescopes that would then be available to folks with mobility devices. We would be focusing on working with folks to help us develop audio descriptions of some of the stuff that we're looking at for folks that are visually impaired, whether they're visually impaired or have the need for ASL interpreters. We would be looking at working with folks that really have an opportunity to provide us with some of the ASL translation, but also looking at Braille materials. In addition to that, we would be looking to address, as I mentioned before, folks that are neurodivergent, figuring out what we would need to do to address those issues. I myself am a disabled person. I have not grown up identifying as a person with disability. I became incredibly adaptive at a young age, but I was fortunate enough that I had vision and I had the ability to be ambulatory. So for me, my shortened arms were a matter of adapting to things. I drive, I care for myself. I do practically everything that I feel a normal or able-bodied person. I hate that term normal, but able-bodied person would be able to do. But I really want to focus on understanding how other people use that terminology, because words have meaning, and words have intentionality. So it's better for us to learn from each other rather than to be critical of the words that we're using, so that we can better understand each other. And so part of what we're going to do with this grant is to attempt to learn from one another. As we have these events in the park, we are going to ask the permission of the participants, but our goal is to have our facility staff, our trails teams available to us so that they can experience these things alongside those people with limitations, to better understand what those barriers are like, and the difficulty in getting around those barriers. So we want to address with our facilities team how we improve these facilities. I'm going to take a minute here to look at the chat, um, and try to address some questions or any comments. Let's see what we got here.
Yeah, you do have a couple of questions regarding the special events and if they're open for the public, but also one in terms of MOUs.
Okay. Absolutely, absolutely. So let me see what we got here. What are these special events for? So again, Leslie, we want to make sure that what we want to do is we want to plan. So I'll give you a little bit of background. Since I joined the park, we've been creating different programs. Not just my division, but the entire park as a whole has been looking to create special engagement events. So we have things like we had an event early on in my tenure that we called. We were approached by Tucson Electric Power, and they asked us if we could host a special event at the park that they could help sponsor, that would focus on the Latino community. And so I am very familiar with a lot of the mariachi community, and rather than hire a professional mariachi, what I did was I invited youth mariachis. Davis Bilingual Elementary has a fantastic program called Las Aguilitas, and we work with other mariachi, student mariachis, Pueblo High School, Tucson High School. We invited different programs to come to the park, and we called it the Saguaro Sunset Serenata, Serenata being Spanish for serenade. And so we had a special event where we invited young people to experience the park first, and then we set up a green room for them, and then they performed on a professional stage that was set up right here at our park. And so, because it's a youth mariachi, we not only had the young people show up, but we had their families show up. So we had upwards of 200 people at the West District, not only experiencing the park for the first time, but experiencing it at sunset with their kids or family members participating in a performance at a national park. So what we did is we took something cultural and we adapted, these mini hikes that we set up around the visitor center. So people constantly were saying, "Wow, this is beautiful. I've never been here before." So it was the opportunity for the first time to experience the national park. So from that, people bought, passes. They came back and visited. We have family members that still show up from that event that happened almost 7 years ago. We've had events called the Poetry in the Park events. We partnered with the University of Arizona's Poetry Center a few weeks back, and we were able to be part of a program by the Library of Congress and the National Poet Laureate, Ada Limon, and she came in partnerships with the U of A's College of the Poetry program, but also in partnership with indigenous members, where we actually, one of the poems that was chosen by one of our local authors here and professor at the University of Arizona. And so she was able to have her poem read here at the park at a special event that we did where we specifically and intentionally invited the tribal community to attend. So we also had in attendance a lot of people from the U of A Poetry Center, and so it was called Poetry in the Park. We've had bird watching events, we've had youth and community development events here at the park. We've had stargazing events. We just recently had the Dark Skies program here. About a year ago, we were identified as only the second national park site in the country as a dark skies facility. In other words, you can see a lot of the Milky Way because we're significantly away from the city of Tucson lights, we're able to see some of the night sky. And so we were able to modify some of the lighting at the park so that people could enjoy the dark skies. So events like that are events that we have regularly. We had a tribal demonstrator day that we had at the park recently, and we had multiple demonstrators talking about their trade and some of the things that they sell in the community, some food, stuff like that. So the goal is to have all of these events, but to make these events accessible to people with limited mobility. For example, our partnership with this grant is going to be with the Southern Arizona Adaptive Sports and Abilities 360 out of Phoenix, where they're going to bring equipment to the park, equipment that we don't have currently in our stock. So mobility devices are really tricky because we don't allow e-bikes in the national park because the national park overlaps with wilderness area. Wilderness area is an area where we don't support having motorized equipment. In other words, if we're sending our crew out into a wilderness site to maybe set up a trail or maybe clean up one of our picnic areas, we can't use motorized equipment out there. So, you actually see people out there with old school saws sawing stuff that normally you would use a chainsaw for, or maybe equipment that might have this. In other words, motorized battery operated equipment is not used in wilderness area. So e-bikes are not allowed in many national parks. So how do we differentiate between a recreational vehicle like an ATV or an all-wheel drive vehicle in wilderness area from people that maybe have a motorized wheelchair that would be able to trek over certain terrain in a national park? Well, there's very specific criteria around that. Whether it's 36 inches, whether a wide, whether it is the type of wheels that it has, the type of battery life that it would have. All of these things are important, but we're not going to tell folks that have these mobility devices that they can't traverse those on national park trails because they're assistive devices, not recreational devices. I don't know if that explains what it is. We're also going to have events where we're going to have audio description for folks that are visually impaired. In addition to folks with visual impairments or mobility issues, we're also going to have materials that are written in Braille. We're going to be looking to devise methods where we use the National Park Service app on your phone to GPS locate you. And when you get to a location, if you have your phone with you and you're visually impaired, the geo tag on that would allow a specific wayside or a sign by the side of a trail to basically be audio descriptive, what a person with vision would be seeing. So it'll describe the location, the plants. Yes.
So Cam, so where would people find information about these events? That was one of the questions. Is there a way
Excellent question.
to get notified?
Excellent question. So, being that this is a collaborative thing, and maybe this also addresses your MOU question, being that we're doing this, I can come up with dates from here to 2026 without fail. I can find times in our schedules where we can insert these events. What I can't guarantee is that we're going to be well equipped to address the needs of people with that might need them because we don't have that equipment here. So I have to collaborate with organizations like SAS or Southern Arizona Adaptive Sports. Also have to coordinate with other partners that we're working with. My intention is to gather as many partners as possible in the next few weeks to essentially look at our calendars together. Maybe within the tribal communities, there's special days that we don't want to interrupt or compete with. So we're going to ensure that we're going to be as collaborative as possible in planning these events. Another consideration, of course, is temperature. We might be really, really cold right now, but we're going to be really, really warm by the end of May. So we have to be very intentional when we plan these events, what time of the day we plan these events, the length of the event, what kind of resources we're going to work to have these folks be able to attend. Another consideration is transportation. We need to work very efficiently with public transportation and other organizations that would be transporting people to the park, but not only to the park, but to trails where these events might be taking place. Because if you get to our visitor center, it doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to get to one of the trails that might be located 1, 2, 3, 5 miles away from the visitor center. So there's a lot of consideration, a lot of coordination that's involved in this. So as of today, we only have the March 8th goal, and we're going to be looking at our calendar for the next few months. We need to schedule a minimum of 2 events per month in certain months because of the temperature. We're going to likely schedule more than 10 events, but our commitment is to schedule a minimum of 10. Two of those events are actually going to be happening in the local community. We're looking for facilities that would accommodate folks with mobility devices and other accessibility issues. So those events would likely be panel discussions to talk about our findings, both at the halfway point and at the end of our 18 months. So the importance of that is to be able to be as accessible to folks. People may not be able to get out to a national park. There's folks that might have issues not only with transportation, but maybe just physically they can't make it. So we're gonna figure out how we do that. Right now, my goal as the accessibility coordinator is to learn as much as possible as I can in the next few weeks, and through the process of this program and beyond, so that I can better advise the park leadership on how we move forward. So as of right now, we only have the March 8th date that we have kind of not necessarily set in stone, but we have pretty solidified. We also are looking to address questions with our partners. What are some side collaborations that we're looking at? Because all of this is reciprocal. We can't expect the whole community to come to the aid of the national park and then the national park not be able to partner or collaborate with other organizations. So we want to be as reciprocal as we can within the confines of our capacity, of course. So as soon as all this is set in stone, not only are we going to put out a press release about the grant and what our partnerships are looking like, but we're also going to have the dates at that point set in stone, and we'll be advertising the full schedule at that point. My goal as the community engagement coordinator and the accessibility coordinator here at Saguaro National Park is primarily to plan beyond those 18 months. What are we going to continue to do for the local community to make this park a park for all? And so that's something that we'll continue to do. And so learning about who those partners are, like the Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities, the Pima Community College, disability resources, all of these different programs that are folks that we are working with are going to be continued partners, is my goal beyond this grant. The National Parks Foundation, the representatives I spoke with so far are incredibly excited because this is a transferable experience. We can take what we've learned here and put it into something that other national park sites can learn from. As a resource, we can be available to not just national parks, but to state parks and county parks and city parks on how we make this happen. My scope of work is exclusively within the national park, for the most part. But then, like I said, we'll have those 2 sessions outside in the local community. In terms of MOUs, we're at the precipice of all that. We're just now developing some of how that's going to work. Currently, we will have a scope of work with 2 organizations, possibly 3, in the next few weeks. Those 2 organizations are an organization, 3 organizations that I highly recommend folks on this webinar to look for. That's Southern Arizona Adaptive Sports. Mia Hansen is a miracle worker there and is well known within the disability community. We're also going to be working with Abilities 360, hopefully out of Phoenix. They have a lot of resources as well that we can access, hopefully. And then another partner that we wrote into the grant is an organization called Wheel the World. And Wheel the World is an international organization that is focused on providing accessibility information to anyone who looks at their website about different places around the world Tucson and Saguaro National Park are listed. And basically their mappers is what they call their navigators, go to these places and do a lot of measuring. They measure doorways, they measure ADA compliant, restrooms, and in hotel rooms, they measure the height of beds and how many accessibility available rooms they have in hotels and resorts, all kinds of stuff related to folks with special needs and needs around accessibility. So those are the three partners that we're looking to work with predominantly. Of course, all of the other partners, including you all, are partners that we're looking to bring together. We're also working very closely with the Office of Accessibility in DC and with their coordinators there. We're also working with MPF and a couple other partners to guide us through the changing, the ever evolving process with the new administration. So we're attempting to address as many of those things as we can, but really at this point, our links to the National Park Accessibility website are listed here in the chat. But I do apologize that we don't have all the things on there that we should, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this, is because we want to improve upon all of that. Ultimately, we will be providing an assessment from everything that we've learned. We'll be providing a final report about what we've learned, and we'll be looking at establishing goals in our 5, 10, and 15-year plans moving forward with facilities here at Saguaro National Park. At least that's our goal, and we'll see what the future holds. But the intention here is to very meaningfully address these barriers and address the needs that this national park unfortunately has that have not been addressed, and so that's really where we're at with this. I'll take another second here to look at the chat. And I'm really curious to better understand the needs of tribal community members as well. I know they're close and very aligned with the average needs of anyone else, but I'm very, very curious to better understand the cultural implications of this particular community. Yeah, absolutely. So this year, our hope is to partner with work with the tribal community, but specifically the tribal council at this point, and look at connecting with events coming up. In my budget this year, I forecasted for a partnership in the weeks leading to Easter, and finding the opportunity to create a storytelling event at the park that would focus on the Yoeme communities, and make a special effort to invite members of that community to share some of the stories they're willing to share with us. Some of this knowledge is incredibly sacred, and it's understandable that some of it isn't always shared with members outside of those communities. But the more we understand each other, the better we can collaborate in the future. So in addition to hosting some of these events at the park, we're also intending on attending as many of those events throughout the year as possible, but specifically attending the special events during the Easter time. We've attempted to partner around events closely related to the Tamal Festival, for example, and stuff like that. I recently learned through our intern that, for example, the Day of the Dead, which is commonly thought of as a Mexican celebration, is also celebrated by the Yaqui community, but there's definitely different traditions. And to create that opportunity this year, our intern set up an altar at the national park. These were not intended to be religious, but they were intended to be insightful for folks that wanted to understand that. And so this Day of the Dead, we're intending on having a celebration of those that have passed on, but including the Yoeme tradition as well as the Mexican tradition in that process. So we're not looking to just look at Easter, and we're looking at different events, and we're looking at hosting other artists from the Yaqui community as well as the Altam community, and look at how we expand that. Our 5-year plan designed to expand north and northeast to engage communities from the White Mountains, to engage communities up north from the Dene community. Rayshawn Ramon, our community, our indigenous engagement specialist, is going to be attending a training both at the Grand Canyon and also in Ajo to share some of the stories near the border. As we all know, the Tohono community overlaps the U.S.-Mexico border, and there's a lot of knowledge to be shared and understood, and specifically in that area. So there is an opportunity here to learn from one another, but also an opportunity to finally tell some of these untold stories.
So thank you very much, Kim, for your presentation and the vision for Saguaro National Park and the engagement you have with tribal communities. I have
Absolutely.
placed your contact information in the chat, so if people have questions, they can contact you by email. And really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your experience and enthusiasm. So thank you very much. And again, folks, thank you very much for joining us today. And any final last words, Kim, before we close out today?
I would just say that when I joined the National Park Service, I was very specific about what I wanted to address, and then those were some of the gaps that I saw as an outsider coming into the national park. And I quickly learned that there is a lot of people at Saguaro that are very interested in making the park accessible to more people that have historically it's been available to. So I'm very proud to say that I'm part of a team here at Saguaro that is looking to be meaningful in their engagement. But what I did also understand was that I didn't represent all of these communities as an engagement person. I identify as Latino. I'm a cisgender male, a Hispanic male, Latino male. I identify as Chicano. So it's a very specific niche within the Latino community. My wife is from South America. So we're teaching our son to understand the South and the central parts of the Americas, as well as the northern parts of the Americas. And I'm enamored with the idea of being able to be part of a bigger community than my own here in Tucson. But I also understand that I am not, a person with that is white. I don't experience that world very often. I'm also not a female, so I don't understand some of those perspectives. I'm also not Asian. I'm not indigenous to this community. My parents are from Central Mexico. I'm also not a person that is African American or understands that community or has experienced some of the things they have. So what I understand is that I need to be thoughtful in the people that I engage so that they can help me better understand how to better serve all of our communities. This can be thought of as something that is about diversity, but it's not. It's about how we build community and how we protect Saguaro National Park and all of the lands in the Sonoran Desert. And so the goal here is to try to learn as much as possible. We built what we call the CAT, the Community Ambassador Team, and they're members from all sorts of the community. But what I've learned from them is that our intersectionalities, those things that tie us together, make us more alike than they make us apart. And so understanding, what it's like to be a person from the queer community or the disability community or a community that doesn't speak English or doesn't speak Spanish. We are learning from all these folks, and so any information that you all can provide, any advice you all can provide, I don't always guarantee that I'll implement everything that's suggested, but I definitely will respectfully take everything in that is provided to me so that I can be a better representative of the park, but also allow for more collaboration within our communities. And I think that's going to be the best foot forward for me and hopefully folks are willing to share some of the knowledge they have so that we can make these spaces more available, not just as recreational spaces, but as professional spaces for those young people who are looking to get involved with conservation careers.